Okay, since I think everybody wants to get straight to the final course, which I think is the full bar somewhere in this room, we are going to go ahead with the next and final portion of tonight's program. I want to thank you all for being so patient. With ministers, you never know when they come and go, but we had two fantastic interventions by two of the most important ministers of the Union Cabinet of India. Of course, more tomorrow and more during the board mission on the 8th. Now, I'd like to introduce a respected colleague and friend, a member of the India Advisory Council, Ms. Recca Menon. Recca is the chairperson and senior managing director at Accenture in India. She has worked for Accenture for the past 18 years. She's a member of the executive council of NASSCOM and was its first woman chairperson from 2021 to 2022. She's also a member of the National Council of CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry, of course our advisory council, and on the board of Invest India. She also is replete with wisdom about India and all things Indian. It is always a joy to interact with her, and she is going to introduce my dear friend, former colleague, and Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, Don Liu. Recca, please come and do the honors. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, I recognize that you've had your dessert. I recognize being a long day. So we've saved the best for the last. My name is Recca Menon. I'm the chairperson and senior managing director for Accenture in India. I'm also a member, as was pointed out, for USIB's India Advisory Board. And US-India corridor has been a very busy place these days. We've noticed that, with cooperation taking place across a broad range of areas. And we've heard both the ministers speak about the need for opening free, open, prosperous Indo-Pacific, world-class infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go into that. Our next speaker, Assistant Secretary Don Liu, serves as a key coordinator for the United States engagement on all these and other issues in South and Central Asia, including bilateral efforts to tackle the pandemic. Indeed, our two countries' cooperation in response to the COVID-19 has been critical to helping our citizens and the world respond to this global crisis. From an Accenture perspective, and by the way, talking about collaboration and commitment to India, India is Accenture's largest geography. We have 300,000 people here out of the 700,000 globally. So during the dark days of the Delta wave, our global CEO, Julie Sweet, co-led a joint initiative with the US Chamber of Commerce, USIBC, and a bunch of other US companies to support India in its time of need. And this global task force on pandemic response actually mobilized hundreds of millions of dollars in official and corporate assistance to increase access to critical medical equipment to protect healthcare workers and treat the sick and accelerate vaccine production. And this task force actually has now become a very important new channel for business community to interface more directly and frequently with the governments, much like what we're doing here today. And this actually collaboration highlights what good can come if our countries work together. And with the bilateral agenda also focused on issues like climate change and new emerging technologies, it's no exaggeration to say that the leadership of Assistant Secretary Liu and his colleagues in both our governments will shape the course for the 21st century. And we are fortunate, therefore, to have someone as experienced and talented as he is in this pivotal role. Assistant Secretary Liu is a Foreign Services officer with over 30 years of government experience. He's a two-time ambassador and former deputy chief of mission at the US Embassy in India. He also has deep experience in global health, having served as the State Department's deputy coordinator for Ebola response during the West Africa crisis. And amongst the many languages that he speaks, he also speaks Hindi and Urdu, so he's very well embedded in here. It's my great pleasure to invite Mr. Don Lu, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Bureau for South and Central Asian Affairs, to the dais and to share his views.
So I actually have a story about chasing a girl, which explains why my Hindi and Urdu is so bad 30 years after studying it. My first assignment in government was in Pakistan, and the State Department taught me Urdu. I studied for 6 months. I was very diligent, learned to read, learned to write, learned to speak. And I get to Peshawar, and they don't speak Urdu in Peshawar. They speak Hinko, and they speak Pashto. And so they taught me the wrong language. And on top of that, my first day in Peshawar, I meet this cute young American girl who's working for an NGO, and she's working in the refugee camps with Afghans, and she's studying Pashto because that was the language you had to know in order to do your trainings. And so very quickly, I throw all my Urdu studies out the window, and I start right over again with Pashto. And some 26 years later, we have been married and happily have 2 kids. And Mujhe harab Hindustani aati hai. My Hindustani is really terrible, but I did get the girl in the end. We have seen some really amazing speeches by ministers. We saw the high-tech version with Dr. Jaishankar and the teleprompter. We saw Minister Gadkari here. Did you see his 45-page speech he was about to read that he just threw out the window when he got there? I am going to try to delight you with exactly 2 pages of remarks. I had the pleasure of service here in Mission India in the 1990s. And there was a book that was going around the embassy at that time that really, for me, embodied the business relationship between the United States and India at that time. It was called One Night at the Call Center. Is anyone here old enough to remember One Night at the Call Center? Okay, here's 1, 2. There's a handful of you. It was turned into a terrible Bollywood movie called Hello later. I do not recommend it. But it's a novel that tells the story of 6 very bright, middle-class IIT graduates who get stuck in dead-end jobs in Gurgaon at a call center. And they have to stay up all night, every night, answering the phone calls of people in the United States, right? Imagine who these people are who are calling for customer service. These are often elderly Americans, often technologically challenged Americans who cannot program the clock on their VCR or can't operate their microwave oven or put the bag in their vacuum cleaner. These are not the brightest Americans. And it tells the story of sort of frustration of India's finest being stuck talking to not the finest Americans. And they have to invent fake American accents and fake American names. It reminds me of a time in our relationship, let's be honest, when this economic marriage between our countries was not built on what it's built on today, right? This was started with rich American companies coming here looking for cheap Indian labor. There was very little technology transfer, very little skills transfer, very little investment in those days. I'm delighted to say that more than 20 years on, the world looks very different. That all of you work with a business model which is about real collaboration, which is about finding a way to develop both of our societies and to find a way to create synergies that take advantage of developing smart young people in both of our countries. I saw this on display when I went to Silicon Valley just a few months ago. I met with a group of Indians and Indian Americans, and the first question I asked them was, who here first came to the United States as students? And all of their hands shot up in the air. These are entrepreneurs who work in the fields of biotech, in robotics, in the human interface for technology. They work in areas of science that I don't begin to understand. But the one thing that unites them is almost all of them started these businesses literally in their garages. Many of these businesses are now worth over $1 billion. My dad is an immigrant to the United States. He immigrated from Taiwan. There's no way he could have, in his wildest dreams, have imagined this sort of American dream. But of course, it's not an American dream. It's also an Indian dream. We see this same miracle happening all across India between Americans and Indians in Ahmedabad, in Pune, in Bangalore, in Chennai. This is a collaboration that has created tremendous talent and wealth and created a technology revolution that's changed our planet. The other amazing trip I went on recently was to Dallas, Texas. I had never been to Dallas, Texas. It was a cultural trip for me. There are a lot of South Asians living in Dallas, Texas. My colleagues and I visited HCL Technology Center. And I remember in the old days when HCL, those were the guys who brought thousands of Indian tech workers to work in the IT sector in the United States, right? They were famous for that. Today, HCL still brings Indians to work in the US, but almost 3/4 of its workforce are Americans working in the United States. They train smart young people in these tech centers to provide highly paid, highly skilled employees in cybersecurity, in financial services, in medical devices, and telecom. The same model, by the way, we see in Wipro, Tata Consulting, Infosys. This is the new economy. This is where we really collaborate and we invest together and we develop smart young people on both of our continents. So I'll end by just saying this begs the question, what's next in this marriage? And I think you can find the answer if you look at the legislation just passed in the US Congress that provides $370 million for clean energy and climate change mitigation. And you look to Prime Minister Modi's audacious goal of 500 gigawatts of installed clean energy in India. We together have a chance to save the planet. We together have the technological skill, the political will, and the spirit of entrepreneurship to do something that rises to the level of a generational challenge on par with the tech revolution that many of you were involved with in the last generation. I hope that colleagues here in this room today will be part of bringing that clean energy revolution to the world. We heard Minister Gadkari talk about his amazing cars that are running on biofuels and running on waste fumes. I mean, this is science fiction, but this is the place where that's going to happen. This is the center of innovation and economic growth. If India can do this, India will change the planet. And I hope that all of you will be a part of that. And I'm just delighted that you are all gathering here in person today in New Delhi after 7 years of wandering the planet, coming back home right here to India. Welcome and thank you for having me join you today.
Thanks. Don, thank you so much. Really appreciate your remarks. And friends, this is going to conclude tonight's activities. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I particularly want to thank and recognize and acknowledge the United States Chargé d'Affaires, Madam Patricia Lucina, who's right there. Pat, it's great to see you. Thank you for bringing your embassy colleagues as well with you. We're delighted to have you and honored. I want to thank everybody who came to the event. Really kind of you. I personally need to make sure to thank all of our sponsors. And we are a business organization, and without your sponsorship, we cannot put these events together. So we have platinum sponsors, NASDAQ and Occidental, gold level sponsors, Amazon, Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Abbott Laboratories. Silver level sponsors, Amway, Apple, Citi, Coca-Cola, Covington and Burling, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, Lockheed Martin, Meta, Northrop Grumman, Pfizer, Salesforce, Sinclair Broadcast Group, Stripe, Suzlon, Tata Sons, TCS, Tractors and Farm Equipment, TransUnion, Visa, and Western Digital. And I'd also like to thank our corporate sponsors, Qualcomm, Zoho Corporation, Boeing, Eli Lilly, and IBM. Friends, without you, we can't get it done. Finally, as your cruise director, I now really need you to hear this. 9 o'clock tomorrow, the show begins down here in, I think, the other big room. But we have 900 registrants for tomorrow. We had to cut off registration. This could be an overflow event. I encourage all of you to get in and occupy real estate as soon as you can so that we can get the show going precisely at 9. We have the Honorable Minister of Finance as our keynote speaker. Her schedule is very pinched tomorrow, and so we want to get cracking, and I would like it if you could all be in your seats as close to 9 or at 9 as possible. Try to get there early. Wish everyone a good night. Thanks again.